I told Renee, I says, I don't know if I can discuss yin without yang. It's very difficult to really separate the two because they together form the whole. And this is a basic tenet of Taoist philosophy, is that the universe is complete. And it is the human mind that requires the breakdown to understand the different parts. The Taoist philosophy of yin yang and how the opposites interact with within the whole of the universe, that has become the basis for traditional Chinese medicine. It is the basis for the 64 trigrams and those relationships that are presented in the I Ching. And so it is difficult to talk about yin without yang, but we're going to actually focus on yin today, and then closer to Father's Day, we're going to present the yang side. In the beginning, this is before the Big Bang. If you imagine the entire universe as we are experiencing it, compressed and in a very small space, the entire universe that we know, the planets, the stars, everything is in here. This is what they call the Wu Qi energy, or the Wu Qi position. It is the position before Tai Chi, before the expansion of the universe. At the time of the Big Bang, there was this expansion into Tai Chi, the yin and the yang. There were what they described 10,000 dichotomous or polar opposites that were created at the time of the Big Bang. And the relationship of all of these entities then became the interesting phenomenon of the current existence of our universe as we experience it. And it's, I just have to digress here. My training as a medical physician is really very interesting because the Western side looks at science and medicine as a basic problem. We're looking at problems and how do we solve these problems. On the Eastern side, they understand that in the beginning, everything was perfect. And so you start with perfect, not a problem. And then you look at what's out of balance. Okay, so this balancing of the yin, the yang, the hot and the cold, the male, the female, all of those entities really have developed in the process of traditional Chinese medicine. So when I'm expressing what is yin, it is actually taking one side of the perfect whole and understanding this is the dark, the wet, the cold, hard, feminine, and it is the receptive part of this whole. Okay, so in that process, we sometimes will look at where things are out of balance, and if there is a deficiency of yin, we need to strengthen the yin side. If there is a deficiency of yang or an excessive of yin, then we need to strengthen the yang side. So this is, I think, one of the basic ideas in traditional Chinese medicine. It is based on Taoist concepts. And what I just wanted to do is present that aspect, and then we can open up the discussion on various things that may be problems for some people, and then we can approach those problems from a Taoist perspective, looking at, okay, what's out of balance here? And where we can bring balance back into the system to create harmony, to create the whole. Let's see, I took some.
Randy.
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Well, I just wanted to just take a moment and really welcome everyone now that you're here to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, which is a conversation circle. So everyone really is going to be invited to help share in their wisdom, your wisdom, and whether or not you particularly know about the concepts of yin and yang in the Taoist perspective. All of us are very familiar with the idea of balance, and all of us have experienced being out of balance. So as we listen to Dr. Wong Kai Ming today, we want to kind of keep that in perspective. These are not just teachings that are from an ancient time in the past and a faraway land. They're things that affect us every day in our daily lives. That said, I thought as we're just about to move on with Dr. Wong, I wanted to share my screen and just present something from this, the Tao Te Ching, which is a Taoist text. Yield and remain whole, bend and remain straight. Be empty and remain full. Be worn and remain anew. Own little and be replete. Own much and be restless. Therefore, the sage embraces the one and sets the example for the whole world. He does not display himself, and so he shines. He does not defend himself, and so he is distinguished. He does not swagger, and so he never stumbles. He does not exult, and so he excels. He does not contend, and so the world cannot contend with him. The ancient adage, yield and remain whole, is not empty assertion. Be truly whole, and all things will come to you.
That was very appropriate. When we practice Tai Chi, Tai Chi literally translated is the grand ultimate. And usually the word chuan is attached to the end, the third word, Tai Chi chuan. So chuan is fist. So the grand ultimate fist, you know, when I was beginning my Tai Chi training, I was very immature, and I thought, this is a little pompous because it's like, this must be the best martial art around. But I then realized, no, the grand ultimate pertains to the Tao, pertains to the one, the whole. And it added the fist as a martial application of Tai Chi principles. So understanding that, when you start your Tai Chi form, we start in what's called the Wu Chi position, with the feet together. And then we open the door, and as we do, we separate the feet, yin and yang. Okay, so metaphorically, that signifies the Big Bang. Okay, so then we'll go through our Tai Chi form, and at the end, there is a closing of the form, and the closing brings the 2 feet back together. So you return to the Wu Chi position. And what that, what Renee just presented was also suggestive of, we eventually return to one. So, and this is, I think, the metaphor of life as well. You know, we are born, and at the end of this existence, the incarnation, we return to world of spirit. So it is just a statement that nothing is permanent. Impermanence is the constant. This is what can be expected. In practicing Tai Chi, you understand there is a beginning and then there is an end. There's an opening and then there is a closing. It's an understanding of the whole person and that person's life. It is all contained in the entity of that life. Just as the universe started with the Big Bang, and billions of years down the line, there will be a closing. We don't know how it's going to happen. It's probably more than I think the human mind can really understand. But the cycle is repeated along so many different levels that it is recognizable as cycling of energy, if you would. So when you think of our existence, we can boil it down into elemental thought and energy. And it's said that the mind moves the energy with thought. So with proper thought, you have proper energy flowing. With improper thought, energy may not be proper, it may be out of balance. So in dealing with issues of balance and imbalance, recognizing where there is excess or insufficiency of certain types of energy, that's where, I think the traditional Chinese physicians, they do excel in having a different mindset. With the Western science and Western medicine, it's more problem-based. So we start with the problem and we look at various ways to affect the problem, writing various prescriptions, seeing what it does, running clinical trials and studies and so forth. And it's one way to understand the reality that we live in. But even without years and years of medical training, if you can get your head wrapped around the Taoist philosophy and understand that we all are perfect to begin with, when things get out of balance, how do we bring that balance back? It becomes, I think, a much more basic approach to dealing with those things that challenge us. This concept of yin, being the feminine, being the receptive, is earth-based. It is based on, and this is interesting how, the earth is also known as Mother Earth. Mother is a yin characteristic, softness, being passive, heavy. The sense of surrender is a yin characteristic. And then if you happen to be related to a water sign astrologically, that also has some yin characteristics. So Taurus, Cancer, Virgo, Scorpio, Capricorn, and Pisces are characteristically yin zodiac signs.
You did mention that yin had to do with the wet, so I'm making that analogy or that connection, right?
Yes. And then we have an instructor that's doing yin yoga. Well, there is a comment about yin yoga that targets the deep connective tissues like the fascia, ligaments, joints, and bones. And in my martial arts training, one of the schools that I went to, it was very interesting because when I started, the instructor said, and many of these schools, most of them are male participants. The instructor really emphasized that you need to get in touch with your feminine side, because that is what makes a martial artist more effective, more complete. Because again, if the male yang side is being presented, the yang side is the muscle and the force and the strength of the external energy. The yin is actually more of the internal. And again, it is said that your chi energy is stored in the ligaments, the bones, and the joints. So yin, again, being a receptive vessel, holds your chi energy within your body. And the expression of chi, particularly when you're doing, say, Chen style Tai Chi, there is this concept called Fa Jing, which is an explosive, expanding energy coming out of your body. And what we were focused on today in our class was more of the yin aspect, which is the Ting Jing, which is a listening, more of a understanding of the energy that's coming out of an opponent. So this gives you, I think, an inherent knowledge of what kind of attack is being mounted, what direction the energy is coming in. And when you understand that, then you can easily defend by redirecting the energy vectors.
Randy, do you think it would be helpful for us all to stand up and you just give us a little sense in the body of what a more yin-like feeling would be and what a more yang-like feeling might be?
Sure. So yeah, if you want to stand and just put your feet about shoulder width apart, okay? And then if you basically get your fists, make your muscles really tight, and punch out in this manner. So you're punching very strongly, very hard. There is a sense of force coming out with each punch, okay? Then, and that's characteristic of a yang expression. And so the Fa Jing that I mentioned earlier is if this energy is coming out of your system and hitting something, that's yang. Now, if you then are anticipating an attack coming in, you're going to be receiving it. So if you then take this attack and you bring it in, but then you redirect it off to the side. So it comes in, you accept it, you just don't allow it to find your center, and you turn off to one side, and then coming in this way, and then off to this side. This is the yin expression because it's much more receptive. You're listening to the energy coming in, okay? There's another exercise that we do in our class. So if you just hug basically a stand of bamboo, and it could be like multiple plants coming up, but they're very tall, and you hold on to them and imagine the wind blowing them off to one side, and you're holding them and they're bending. Okay, so they're accepting the wind, they're accepting that force, but then their natural structure allows it to spring back. So it just flows with the wind, bending, accepting, and then springing back. So the resilience of the bamboo allows this energy to pass. And it has no judgment on, oh, this wind is terrible, it's bending us. You know, it just accepts it. It just takes it and it goes from one side to the other. So that's the yin characteristic of Tai Chi. It is, and let me try to do a little visual sort of guided imagery for you. So if you have a seat, just relax, and then we're going to have you close your eyes. And as you breathe, you don't have to focus on your breath, but it basically naturally moves in and out. Okay? And then I want you to visualize a mountain. And at the base of that mountain there's a lake. And at the shore of the lake, there are animals that come to drink. There are fish swimming in the water. And nature is in balance. The mountain presides over this surface of water, which is very smooth, glassy, undisturbed. And then a cloud kind of rolls in, nestles up to the mountain. And there is basically an electrical discharge of lightning, thunder, and water falling from the cloud, drizzling down the side of the mountain, eventually reaching the lake. Nature is in balance. The mountain stands strong. The lake accepts and receives the rain and the water with the rivulets coming down the mountain. And this is nature. The mountain has no judgment. The mountain just stands and accepts this is part of the whole of nature. At the shore of the lake, there may be predator animals that are hunting other animals for prey. You might have a mountain lion going after a deer. And of course, it appears to be violent. But again, if you accept that this is part of the whole of nature, the mountain has no judgment about what's happening at the animal level. It basically has no judgment of what's happening at the plant level or even at the mineral level, the rock interface with the lake. It just is. It is nature. And this is the way nature exists and expresses its energy in perfection.
Really beautiful. I wonder if I could ask about people's personal experience in terms of these opposites. What do you make of these from your own experience in life? Times when you've noticed yourself maybe being more receptive, and other times in your life when you've noticed yourself being more active, more outgoing. And yeah, just wondering about that balance that you've detected in yourself. How does this concept that we're looking at today strike you in terms of your life? My husband Cliff is often here with us, and he wouldn't mind if he were here today for me to say this. I've noticed about the two of us that one of the reasons that it works for us to have been together as long as we have been, which is, I don't know, like about 45 years or something, is that we kind of switch off. There are times when one of us is more dominant, and then the other one is in that more receptive mood. And then there are other times when the other one's more dominant and we're in the other one's in the receptive mode. And for example, when we were building our house, we just had a pact between us. And it was that if something had to do with like the structural integrity of the house, and my husband is a builder, then that would be something that we would defer to him about. Whereas if something had more to do with the aesthetics of it, that would be my responsibility. So then he would defer to me and I would take the lead in regard to that aesthetic element. So this kind of balance of going back and forth between the structural side and the aesthetics side happened to work really well for us. People told us before we were going to build our house, oh my gosh, don't you know you're probably going to get a divorce over this? And that was kind of scary to hear. But we actually ended up just having a blast. It was really fun. And I think that going back and forth in terms of the balance really helped to make the difference for us. Carolyn's tuning in, as I mentioned, from Santa Barbara, California. She's the president of the Institute of World Culture there, I might want to add.
I think balance, or yin and yang, you need to have a transition period. What I find, if you've been really active, don't suddenly think you're going to switch over and be busy being, more quiet. You need transition. It's a transition process. That's what I'm trying to say. It's almost like before you switch from hot to cold water, you need to go to the middle way and either have no water for a few minutes or have water that's very moderate. And I think that's true in good conversation. There needs to be a pause. There needs to be, that allows for a more effective transition. So that's what I've experienced. I used, years ago, I read an article about the comma and how the lowly comma was the instrument in pausing in writing and in speaking. I often advise that if you want an effective speech, you make sure that you stop and you don't just get all nerved up and you're just going without any break. The listener can't listen effectively if you just out and run off, or sometimes you speak up and sometimes you moderate your speech.
Very wise. Thank you.
We often say that your chi energy flows not in the postures of the movement, but in the transition between the postures. And so it's as if, and everybody understands baseball. So, it's not whether you made it to first base or second base, it's how you get from base to base and eventually return home. That's where the game is played. It's not the guy standing on the base. It's how they get to the base and the action of the game that is played out as they move from one base to the other. So it's that transition, as Carolyn said very astutely, that is where the actual energy flows.
Dr. Wong, I was fascinated by what you said at the beginning about Chinese medicine versus Western medicine, because you're proficient at both. It's a very interesting period I think we're living in, because the two have crossed. Asian medicine is very, very popular in the West, and Western medicine has pretty nearly taken over much of Asia. How are the Chinese managing to balance the ancient traditions of Chinese medicine, which are so powerful and so strong for so many thousands of years, and now seem not to be functioning well at all, now that the Chinese are so busy trying to cope with Western medical modes?
Yes, Pearl, thank you for that question. In my understanding, certain hospitals in China, they have doctors who are trained in Western science that basically consult with traditional Chinese medicine physicians, and both are brought in on a problem to evaluate a patient, and they will both make their recommendations, and the patient will decide on which direction they want to go, which I think is the best of both worlds. Now, this was when I was earlier in my career. I heard that this is what was happening. But as you say, as the Chinese society becomes more first world, and you know, they get caught up in the hustle bustle of, you know, the way we've been experiencing life with, you know, rapid growth, a lot of construction. The society, I'm sure, is changing. I don't have a recent assessment of how they're doing this balancing between the Eastern and Western approaches, but I'm hoping that they are continuing to honor both, because, you know, Western medicine started with the scientific method, and it is 200, maybe 250 years old, whereas traditional Chinese medicine is over 3,000 years old. And a lot of those concepts are continuing, and much of those practices and techniques have been passed on through families from generation to generation. So a lot of times, you know, you learn from your grandparents or parents, and you continue your practice in that way. Whereas in the Western society, you have to go to medical school, you have to get your internship, your residency, specialty training, and then you open your office and you're practicing. So it was well, for my personal practice, I was pretty much, I think, on top of my game after I got my board exams, my board certificate. And there was a patient who had chronic pain in his hand, and I did the $1 million workup in terms of, you know, imaging studies, electrodiagnostic studies, and I had to bring him in. I told him, I said, you know, I can't find anything wrong. There's nothing that I can operate on. And then he said to me, well, would you mind if I go get an acupuncture consult? And I said, sure, because I didn't have anything to offer him. And he continued to have significant pain. 2 weeks later, he comes back. He says, wow, I had like 3 acupuncture treatments and my pain is almost gone. And so it hit me that from a Western physician Western medicine trained physician perspective, there was a heck of a lot that I didn't know. Even after I passed my boards, I felt like I knew essentially the entire realm of Western science. That was the moment I think I opened up my mind. I said, okay, you know what? I need to learn more about this other stuff. And I said, it's too late for me to actually become certified in acupuncture, but I had already had a pretty good understanding of Aikido and Tai Chi. And so I started applying some of the energy principles into my practice. And what was really interesting is when I did that, my patients had shorter recoveries, they healed faster, I had better results. You know, everything really, I would say, balanced better when I mixed the East philosophy with Western techniques. So when I operate on somebody, you know, I address the tissues, I address the blood vessels, and I'm talking to them saying, look, I'm coming through, we've got this project, I have to come through, and if I cut you, just stop bleeding or spasm down so we can get this project done. And so I have very little blood loss now. And it's, you know, it may be that my technique is different, but patients do better. And so it makes sense to actually have the benefits of both sides coming together for the benefit of the patient.
Would you say that one of the two is more of a yin practice and one is more of a yang practice between traditional Chinese medicine and Western medicine?
Well, obviously, I'm a surgeon, and obviously, when you're cutting tissue, that's a yang aspect. Yeah, I wouldn't generalize Western science as yin or yang versus the Eastern approach. They both have elements of yin and yang. I would tell you that early in my practice, we used to have the concept that, oh, the doctor knows everything, okay? And it was the doctor who would basically do an assessment, an examination, and tell the patient what they needed to do, okay? And that's a very yang process, because I know better, because I've been trained, I went to medical school and you know, all this training, and I'll tell you what you need to do. That was how we used to interface with patients. It was very much a yang aspect. Then around the mid to late 1990s, there was a futurist who gave a lecture at one of our national societies. And he said to us, he says, you know, that style is old school. It's just not going to fly, because you have to understand the idea of communicating, having a discussion with the patient is more important than you telling them what you think. And so it brought some balance into, I think, medicine. And he encouraged the physician, you don't stand over the patient and tell them what they need to do. You pull up a chair, you sit down face to face, have a discussion. You present options. You have this give and take, which is much more of a yin process. And you help the patient decide. You know, you provide your knowledge, but you help them to decide. You don't tell them what they need to do, which I think works so much better. You know, at that time, majority of surgeons were men. And in the last couple of decades, we've seen that shift. I'm not sure if we have more women surgeons now, but the number of women in surgery is growing significantly. And I remember that futurist in his talk, he said, okay, you guys, you need to just make way for the feminine side, because the women are the ones that make the decisions in this country. You know, they do most of the shopping, the purchasing decisions. They will basically design your house and decide what kind of furniture you're going to be sitting on. So you need to kind of just open your minds to what they have to say, rather than talking from your ego and you know, telling them this is what I think you need. And surgery was kind of like the most resistant of the fields. I think, you know, psychiatry understood this. Internal medicine, they were already doing the discussion aspect. Surgeons were very resistant, or not resistant, but I think probably the last group to really accept, yeah, we need to kind of have a discussion rather than let me tell you what you need, because I know better from my training and so forth. So it's been an evolution in the last several decades of perspective in medicine.
Bob?
Earlier, Dr. Wong, you talked about it being we are perfect, as opposed to we are on the way, we want to become perfect, but we actually are perfect. And when you took us through that guided meditation, it struck me as very interesting that you had a mountain over the lake. And of course, in the I Ching, as you look at the arrangement of yin and yang, it'll come into trigrams and hexagrams, and they could have a mountain over the lake, as you described. You could also have a lake over the mountain, and a mountain lake, and a different kind of energy. So it struck me that putting those two things together, that we are perfect, but the yin and yang is extremely complicated. So we may be having yang and yin and yang in a particular kind of form. And it struck me, if you ask a question, should I take this job? Should I get married? And you cast the I Ching and you get lake over mountain, it's going to basically say, well, there's a certain arrangement of yin and yang, and this is what's going on. And of course, you can or cannot. It's not usually a yes or no answer. It's really that feeling of, well, this is the situation, and it corresponds to this yin and yang conditioning. I wonder if you could comment on that. There's a lot of different elements there.
Yes, I've dabbled in, I guess what you might call divination, in terms of, I remember when we were kids, we used to have that black or the round 8-ball, and you turn it around, this little message comes floating up to the glass, and you can read, an answer to your question. And it is sometimes not a direct yes or no. It will create something like, find a pretty flower, and it's like, what kind of answer is that? And but when you start thinking about it, again, this is the mental energy going into, first of all, the question, and then what kind of answer shows up. It starts changing the energy patterns in your auric field to allow you perhaps to come to a decision. And it's not as clear as yes or no. Should I take this job or not? I mean, it may be telling you, gee, they're talking about a flower. Maybe I need some, a different direction to connect with nature, or something like that. I mean, it's kind of fascinating. And the I Ching presents 64 different combinations in terms of how the trigrams are arranged, to be able to predict, I think, an answer or a solution to a situation. The divination process is kind of an interesting concept, because it goes beyond your mind-body connection. It actually brings in the spiritual connection. So you basically, your entity is not just you physically, mentally, but it's physical, mental, and spiritual. And when you really think about it, it makes sense, because energy is all of that. And the perfection of the whole, if you are a whole being, and we all, are whole, whether we know it or not, we just perceive that something's out of balance, but whatever is out of balance is obviously because it's pulling this whole to one side, and that's what we're experiencing.
I find it interesting that it's more talking about, as you said before, process than coming up with a particular thing. In other words, there's changing lines, the yin and yang. There's a certain kind of element of things working themselves out, and there's images with, associations that you have with those, rather than changing yourself to become something else. You're dealing with the condition of what you are. That strikes me as being, very natural, as opposed to unnatural. I think in the Tao Te Ching it says somewhere that the best way of knowing is not knowing.
Yeah, and as you were talking, what came to me was the acceptance of how things are is very much a yin characteristic. the need to do something is a yang characteristic. So I often say, from my martial arts training, it is not really the need to dominate and control, which is a yang characteristic of the external martial arts. We place value on the ability to harmonize with the energy around us and the forces coming to us, rather than identifying with an MMA fighter brawling in a cage. I visualize an interchange of forces with an opponent more like a waltz or a dance, and harmonizing with that motion so it flows through a beautiful rather than an aggressive or traumatic encounter. And accepting, okay, this guy is upset with me and obviously wants to hurt me. If I step back, expand my mind to encompass the both of us in a system, accepting that relationship is already perfect. What's out of balance here? I must have said something or to get him this way. And if I accept that, okay, I'll take responsibility for whatever it was that I said, then my interface with him is more of, gee, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you in that way. And a lot of times it's like, let me buy a drink, or let's go get some coffee and let's talk it out. I mean, it doesn't have to be a fight. So in this way, you can win actually without fighting. So release the need for control and dominance. Just focus on harmonizing and bring it into a smoother transition that way.
Can we call on Robert Moore there?
Yeah, this is kind of an incidental question, Dr. Wong. I thought I heard you say that in surgery, you actually talk to the tissues in the blood vessels. So that's an incidental question. Whether that is, did I hear you properly? And then you got a good response from them? And then the other question is, in your experience, what kind of symptoms do you see as physical or mental, psychological, the yin being out of balance, too much yin, too much receptivity?
Okay, the first part, yes, I do address the various elements of the tissue, but as I was mentioning earlier, sometimes it's a matter of just stepping out, stepping back, and actually looking at the relationship of the patient and the surgeon together as a perfect entity. When I am cutting through tissue, I address the tissue very logically that we have a project we need to accomplish. That in accomplishing that project, I actually have to disrupt some of the integrity of your structure. And but we're both on the same side to do this project because the results will be something that the patient desires. And it's something that I feel confident that I can achieve. So it's joining essentially my energy with the patients and creating an agreement or a pact that yes, we are on the same side to accomplish something, and this is what we're trying to do. Now, I'm thinking of certain patients, to the second part of your question, who come to my office and they are excessively yin in the sense that, you know, oh, doctor, I know you can fix me. I know, you know, I've reviewed your credentials, and I know you're so great. And you know, it's obviously they're kind of like trying to butter up my ego. And but what I am perceiving from the yin presentation is that I need you to do this, and I'm not going to take any responsibility for whatever happens. And it's an unrealistic expectation that they want me to fix something, and they're not willing to accept all of the ramifications that can result. So the result is something that they're putting it totally on me, and they may not, and many times they're not happy. So they may end up with, you know, a less than desirable result, even though it's improved. They'll be hounding me to fix this and fix that. So that's something that I'm still struggling with in terms of trying to select the proper patients. And so it is, you know, an agreement to come into surgery or under any kind of medical treatment really should be a balance between the patient and the practitioner treating them.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, beautiful answer. Well, I'm seeing that we're at the top of the hour. It's our practice at this time to ask whether one of you there participating with us would like to give Dr. Randy Wong Kai Ming a vote of thanks for his presentation today. And then at that point, if anyone wants to stay on, we're willing to stay on, but we like to kind of recognize the time limits that people have allowed for themselves to come. So
I'm going to jump in here, Renee, if you don't mind. As a fellow Western medicine practitioner and retired surgical nurse, fellow practitioners have described surgery as its own moving meditation. And there's a lot of ritual that goes into a practitioner walking into an OR confident and in unison with their patient. And I can very much appreciate your desire to provide that kind of care to your patients. So thank you for your presentation today. And I have been enlightened by the conversation and enjoyed it. So much gratitude to you today, and we have appreciated you coming and spending your time.
Thank you for those kind words.
beautiful, Carol Ann. Yes, and certainly I want to thank Dr. Wong on behalf of all of us for sharing his immense knowledge, not only from the medical perspective, but also as a movement practitioner of Tai Chi. It was very helpful for my mind to experience it in my body. So I know that was hugely helpful for me.